Did you know that in the US, the food on our dinner plates has to travel an average of 1,500 miles from the farm? And that's the average. Some of it journeys a lot farther, like your morning coffee from Colombia or those out-of-season strawberries flown from halfway across the world. But what if there was a way to enjoy fresher, more sustainable food while cutting down on all that travel? That's where the farm-to-table movement comes in. Hey everyone, Amber from Sustainable Jungle here, where we share sustainability tips, tricks, hacks, products, brands, and stories to better our planet. And summer is fast approaching, sort of, if you're like me in Wyoming, where it can't really decide what it wants to do. But most places, summer is approaching, and farmers markets are starting to open up for the season, which means that the time is quite literally ripe to talk about what I think is one of the most important food movements of our time: farm to table. You've probably seen the term on restaurant menus, heard it thrown around in foodie conversations, or maybe you even support it yourself. But what does it actually mean? And more importantly, how does it contribute to sustainability, and why should you care? Before we dig in and answer those questions, just take one quick second to scroll down and give this video a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, so you can stay in the loop on all of our latest videos. Okay, so what is the farm to table movement? Farm to table is a food system that prioritizes sourcing ingredients directly from local farms or growing things yourself, rather than relying on large-scale industrial food production. And its goal is pretty simple: fresh, seasonal, and minimally processed food produced as close as possible to where it's consumed. But beyond just being a food trend, farm to table represents a philosophical shift in how we think about food, sustainability, and our roles as consumers in the global food system. Because we as a society have become tragically and devastatingly disconnected with our own food supply. According to a scholarly report in the Journal of Agricultural Education, agricultural literacy is at a depressingly low point, which basically means that a high percentage of people, Americans especially, don't even have a rudimentary understanding of food or agriculture. Here are some examples. An online survey commissioned by the Innovation Center of U.S. Dairy found that 16 million people think that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. Well, duh, of course. And 40% of Californian 4th, 5th, and 6th graders don't know that hamburger comes from cows. And it's no wonder when orange juice is the nation's most popular fruit, and French fries and potato chips are the nation's most popular vegetables.
It's not looking good, Bev. It's not looking good.
One grade school respondent told researchers, "My mommy told me bread comes from an animal. I don't know which animal." And these aren't just hyperbolized anecdotes, these are real responses from a survey that was conducted, and it's really scary to think about the implications of this. We are already losing farmers and the desire to farm at a staggering rate. Farmers are getting older, in that the average age of the American farmer is now 58.1 years old. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever done any farm work out there, it is hard. Physically intensive work, even for a young body like mine. And no one wants to take over their farms. So what happens when these farmers become literally too old enough to do this, and then nobody wants to take over? So we not only lose our food producers, but the knowledge to even replace them. Enter Farm to Table, which seeks to change this, reforging those connections by encouraging a direct relationship between farmers and consumers, cutting out unnecessary intermediaries such as large distributors and industrial food supply chains. This means that food is going to reach our plate faster, fresher, and with fewer preservatives and artificial modifications. It also ensures that farmers receive more of a fair price for their products without middlemen taking a really significant cut, which is also going to make small-scale, sustainable farming a lot more viable on the whole. Now, before we dive deeper into the specific focus points of the farm-to-table movement, let's pause for just a moment and talk about the history of where it came from. Now, the farm-to-table movement may feel like one of those modern, trendy trends, but in reality, it's actually rooted in the way that humans have eaten for most of history. Before the convenience of supermarkets, before industrialized agriculture, and before a time when you could find strawberries in December, shipped from thousands of miles away. Because for thousands of years, food was deeply intertwined with the land and the people who cultivated it. Farmers grew what thrived in their local climate, and communities relied on their immediate surroundings for nourishment. There were no supply chains stretching across continents, just simple local food. And what people ate varied wildly based on where they live and what season it was. But one thing was constant. Freshness and seasonality weren't trendy. They were the only option. In other words, our ancestors ate what was available around them, dictated by seasons, geography, and the natural rhythm of food production. And then, of course, everything changed with the Industrial Revolution. Mechanized farming, synthetic fertilizers, and refrigeration enabled food to travel farther and last much longer. And while some of this was beneficial in terms of development and progression of the human species, we have definitely taken it too far. Because the rise of factory farming and processed foods in the mid-20th century meant that food became cheaper and more accessible than ever before at a really significant cost. Mass production often prioritizes shelf life and efficiency over taste, nutrition, and, as we know, environmental sustainability. Supermarkets boomed at this time, offering a dizzying array of options, many of them being highly processed, plastic packaged, and full of artificial preservatives. Now, the idea of eating food grown just a few miles away became a quaint, old-fashioned notion in an era of convenience. As grocery store aisles filled with TV dinners and instant microwavable meals, the counter movement began to stir, and this actually happened probably before you think it did, back in the 1960s and 70s. This time period brought about a growing awareness of what was in our food, like pesticides and preservatives, and people started to question the wisdom of an industrial food system. And if there is a single name associated with the modern farm-to-table movement, it is Alice Waters. In 1971, she opened Chez Panisse, which is a restaurant in Berkeley, California that is dedicated to simple, high-quality food made with fresh, local ingredients. And Waters wasn't just serving meals, she was making a statement by doing this. She built direct relationships with farmers, proving that sourcing locally could elevate not just the flavor of the dish, but also the health of local economies and ecosystems. And it was really her philosophy that inspired an entire new generation of chefs and eaters that started thinking critically about where their food was coming from. Across the pond, a similar movement was taking root because in 1986, Carlo Petrini founded the slow food movement in Italy as a response to the growing dominance of fast food culture. Slow food emphasized regional traditions, sustainable farming, and the pleasure of eating well-sourced, well-prepared meals. I mean, who doesn't love that? And this aligned perfectly with the farm-to-table ethos that was happening over here in the United States, reinforcing the idea that food isn't just fuel, it's culture, it's history, it's connection. What started as a philosophy embraced by a few pioneering chefs has now expanded into a global movement. Farm-to-table is no longer confined to high-end restaurants either. It's influencing grocery stores, farmers markets, school lunch programs, and even fast casual chains. Most people are seeking out food that's grown closer to home, not just for the taste, but for the health benefits, the environmental impact, and the support of local farmers. The movement is still obviously evolving, but one thing is clear: that the desire to eat fresh, local, sustainable food is not just a passing trend. It's a return to our roots and perhaps the future of food itself. So, what exactly does that look like? Well, one of the key components to the farm-to-table movement is seasonality. So, unlike industrial agriculture, as we've talked about, which uses extensive refrigeration, chemicals, and cross-continental shipping to make any ingredient available anywhere, any time of year, farm-to-table encourages people to embrace what is naturally available in a given season. I mean, I don't know if you've ever bought off-season oranges in your grocery store, but frankly, gross. There's a reason that things are harvested when they are supposed to be harvested. Eating seasonally ensures that food is harvested at peak ripeness and nutritional value, which is going to offer better flavor and health benefits while obviously also reducing the carbon footprint of transportation and storage. And this is especially important considering food is not as nutritious as it used to be due to modern agricultural processes that increase crop yields but disturb soil health and essential interactions between plants and soil fungi, which basically reduces the absorption of nutrients from the soil. And as this National Geographic article reminds us, quote, "These issues are occurring against the backdrop of climate change and rising levels of carbon dioxide, which are also lowering the nutrient contents of fruits, vegetables, and grains," end quote. And as this meta-analysis confirms and calls, an alarming decline in the nutritional quality of food. According to Christy Eby, an expert in climate change and health at the University of Washington in Seattle, what our grandparents ate was healthier than what we're eating today. Even among people who eat mostly whole, non-processed foods, we're just not getting as much nutrition as people were decades ago. A report by the Rodale Institute echoes these sentiments, noting, this is a long quote, so bear with me here, that while many Americans are living longer than their parents, they're not living healthier or happier lives. Lifestyle diseases like obesity, diabetes, and heart disease are on the rise as the standard American diet has come to consist of mostly processed foods that are high in sugar and fat. The rise of this diet can be partially attributed to changing agricultural systems that prioritized yields and shelf life over nutrition. There's also a really strong community aspect to farm to table, because by buying directly from local farmers or dining at restaurants that source locally, consumers reinvest into their local economies. Farmers markets, community-supported agriculture or CSA programs, and farm-to-table restaurants all create stronger connections between producers and consumers, which fosters a greater appreciation for food and sustainable farming practices. And finally, the farm-to-table movement emphasizes food transparency. So, industrial food production is going to obscure where ingredients come from, how they were grown, what chemicals or processes are used to preserve them, and even the ingredients themselves. Did you know that nutrition labels are allowed to be up to 30% wrong? So, on the other hand, Farm to Table wants to restore this trust by ensuring that consumers know the origin of their food, how it was produced, and what exactly is in it, which is going to empower us to make more informed choices about what we're eating. So in short, Farm to Table isn't just about eating fresh food, it's about rebuilding an entire food system that values sustainability, ethical farming, and community resilience. And as a result of all that, Farm to Table is going to encourage a decentralized, resilient food system on the whole. What does that mean? Well, industrial agriculture relies on monocropping, which means growing vast amounts of a single crop over really large areas, which depletes soil nutrients, increases vulnerability to pests and disease, and requires heavy use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. In fact, only 8% of farms in the US produce more than 4 crops. Only 8%. That's wild. And here I plant like 40 different crops in my small garden every year. Farm to Table, by contrast, often supports diverse, regenerative agriculture practices that prioritize soil health, crop rotation, and biodiversity, which, if you're not familiar with that term and why biodiversity loss is quite possibly the single biggest threat to our planet right now, please go check out our other video on that topic. Basically, crop diversity helps maintain productive farmland for future generations while also reducing harmful environmental impacts of farming, some of which are somewhat inevitable, but it's going to vastly reduce things like soil erosion and water pollution. So, coming off of that, let's dive a little bit deeper into why Farm to Table matters for sustainability. Well, aside from supporting biodiversity and soil health by encouraging these small-scale sustainable agricultural practices, Farm to Table also offers a solution to many of the other problems that have been caused by industrial agriculture. Here's some examples. Number 1, fewer food miles means fewer carbon emissions. Most supermarket food, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, travels an average of 1,500 miles before it reaches your plate, which obviously requires massive amounts of fossil fuels to fuel those refrigerated trucks, cargo ships, etc. The Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture found that conventionally sourced food costs 4 to 17 times more fuel than local food and produces 5 to 17 times more CO2. And they also found that only 2 food items, pumpkins and mushrooms, traveled less than 500 miles. 6 food items that they surveyed, including grapes, lettuce, spinach, broccoli, cauliflower, and green peas, traveled over 2,000 miles to reach the Chicago market at which they were doing this study. The average distance traveled amounted to 1,518 miles. And figure 3 from their study shows the distance that select produce items traveled before reaching their final destination. Another study conducted by the Waterloo region of southwestern Ontario investigated the food miles associated with 58 commonly eaten imported foods. And the study found that each food item traveled an average of 4,497 kilometers, or 2,811 miles, producing 51,709 tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually. For highly processed, microwavable meal-type foods, the impact can be even larger. Think about frozen lasagna. The wheat for the pasta might be grown in Italy, the tomatoes and the spinach for the sauce might come from California, the beef could be raised in Texas, and the cheese could be made in Wisconsin. So to get an idea of how far the foods that you eat travel and the emissions associated with each one, I'm going to link to this handy food miles calculator in the description below. Number 2, it minimizes food waste because fresher food lasts longer. Food waste is obviously a major sustainability issue, one that I talk about a lot here on this channel because it's one of those areas that I'm personally really passionate about because it is such a preventable form of waste, and yet it is so pervasive. Right now, nearly 1/3 of all food produced globally goes uneaten. That's a really depressing statistic for me, especially when you consider how many people in this world are going hungry. And much of this waste occurs because food spoils in transit or it sits too long on grocery store shelves. Farm to Table reduces this waste by shortening the supply chain. Food is harvested at peak ripeness and goes directly to the consumer, meaning it lasts longer in your fridge and is less likely to end up in the trash. Number 3, Farm to Table works with nature, not against it. In the age of industrial agriculture, we've come to expect strawberries in the winter and avocados year-round. But growing food out of season requires energy-intensive methods such as heated greenhouses or long-distance transportation from warmer climates where they are in season. And typically when you're shipping from those places, they have to be harvested before things are actually technically ripe, because if you harvested it when it was ripe, it would then be overripe by the time it got to your grocery store. Number 4, less packaging. You walk into any grocery store and you are going to see rows of plastic wrapped produce, pre-cut fruit in plastic containers, and aisles filled with overly packaged foods. This packaging, much of which is single-use, contributes to the global plastic waste crisis, with millions of tons of it ending up in landfills and oceans every single year. Farm to Table, on the other hand, is going to eliminate much of this unnecessary packaging because when you buy from a local farm directly or from a farmer's market, food is often sold loose or in reusable containers with compostable packaging that drastically cuts down on plastic waste. For instance, when I get berries at my local farmer's market in the summertime, I can get them in a little cardboard thing instead of the non-recyclable plastic clamshells that you have to get berries in at the grocery store. Number 5, a more resilient food system. One of the biggest lessons in recent years, especially during the global supply chain disruptions that we've seen recently, is that our food system is really fragile. Long-distance transportation, reliance on industrial farms, and centralized food distribution make it vulnerable to climate change, pandemics, and geopolitical conflicts. Farm to Table, on the other hand, strengthens local food networks, which make communities more self-sufficient and less dependent on a global supply chain that could have multiple points of failure. A decentralized food system is a more resilient one, capable of withstanding shocks and adapting to environmental changes. And of course, along with that, we get greater food sovereignty as individuals. We get control over what we eat and how it's produced. Did you know that just 10 companies, among them Nestle and Unilever, control almost all large food and beverage companies in the world? And a report released back in 1997 by the USDA found that 80% of the meat industry is controlled by only 4 firms. And we all know that monopolization of basically every industry has only continued to grow worse in the decades since. By growing our own food or sourcing directly from sources that we know locally, we can refuse to participate in these oligarchical practices perpetuated by big ag and put control of our food back in our hands, as it always should have stayed. So, how can you get involved? Now, I'm really fortunate to live in a small rural town which has a really huge focus on local food. In fact, aside from pantry staples like pasta and flour and things like that I buy very little food from far away. Most of it is stuff that I either grow myself or purchased from local farmers, many of whom I know personally now, but on the other hand, I also live in rural Wyoming, where we are still very farm-focused, and I mean, it's a lot of people's livelihoods here, so obviously we place a big importance on it, and I know that it's not like that everywhere. But here, we have several active weekly farmers markets that I attend every single Saturday, and we actually even now have a year-round farm-to-consumer market and communal kitchen where anyone, like even me, could walk in and sell excess produce right onto the shelves. And if that sounds a little weird, It's not some sketchy operation. It's actually a legitimate division of the nonprofit Slow Food USA, which has local chapters all over the country providing support and grant funding exactly for things like this that promote and support local food. If you want to see if there's a local chapter near you, you can check out their website, and if not, maybe consider starting one yourself. I mean, that's how our Meadowlark Market came to be here for me. Even our local grocery store buys directly from local farmers and growers. And the entirety of my state actually has a program where you can go online and sign up for drop delivery of chosen products from local farms across the state. So basically, if there was a farmer in, say, Cheyenne that grows X and no farmer here grows it, I can order it, and then once a week they deliver my order to one of the drop points in my town. And they go all over the state and do this to ensure that everybody has access to things that they might not in their particular location. But even if you don't have the local focus that my community does, getting involved in the farm-to-table movement is probably a lot easier than you think. And one of the simplest and most direct and effective ways to support it is to simply shop at local farmers markets. This way, you can buy directly from the people who grow your food, which also means that you can ask them questions about how they grow your food. You can have conversations with them to encourage sustainable practices. I think that's really important that we have those conversations and that we learn from each other. And then on the other hand, you're also going to get the freshest, most flavorful produce possible. Or you could take it a step further and join a CSA, which is a community-supported agriculture movement. CSAs offer a really unique way to deepen your connection to local food. So by subscribing or joining a CSA, you basically pay a farm upfront for a share in their seasonal harvest, and then you receive weekly or bi-weekly boxes of fresh local produce in return. So this not only ensures that you have a steady supply of produce and food, but it's also going to help provide the farmers with financial stability, which allows them in turn to focus on sustainable farming practices rather than being the most efficient in order to ride out market fluctuations. Number 3, eat seasonally. This is a big theme here in this video, obviously, because eating seasonally is just going to mean choosing foods that are naturally grown in your region at a given time of year. This practice, again, reduces the reliance on imported goods, which has the whole big impact associated with it. Even if you don't necessarily have the option to buy local, you can still consider what is seasonally available shopping at your grocery store. For instance, I'm not going to buy strawberries in December in Wyoming because I know that no strawberries were grown in December in Wyoming. Instead, I might purchase things like potatoes, where I know that there are people that can grow potatoes year-round, just depending on their greenhouse setups. So this one requires just a little bit of research. I recommend that you start by learning what fresh fruits and vegetables are in season each month where you live, or even in areas surrounding you, maybe not necessarily in your state, but in your country. And that way you can kind of get an idea of when things should be available and when they shouldn't, and you can in your head start planning meals and planning out your months of eating accordingly. Number 4, you can support restaurants that source locally, because a lot of them are actually embracing the farm-to-table ethos by sourcing ingredients from local farmers and producers. When you're dining out, vote with your fork and look for menus that highlight these sort of ingredients, and don't hesitate to ask where the food comes from. Again, this is also really common where I live, to find restaurants that serve things like local beef, local fish, local produce, etc. And for the ultimate farm-to-table experience, grow your own. Regular watchers probably know by now that I am an avid gardener, and learning to grow and produce my own food has been one of the most rewarding things that I have ever started doing. Even if you don't have a sprawling garden and a ton of outdoor space, growing your own food to some extent is something that almost everyone can do. Something as simple as a small herb garden on your windowsill, a few tomato plants on the balcony, or a raised bed in your backyard can provide at least some amount of fresh homegrown ingredients while reducing your reliance on store-bought produce, even if just a little bit. I have also found that gardening really deepens your appreciation for the work that goes into growing food, so that way you don't take it for granted. You don't want to waste things because suddenly you know how much effort that took to grow. Plus, gardening is obviously a really fun and therapeutic hobby, so I recommend it on those grounds as well. And if you maybe don't especially have any space to grow locally or at your own house, you can look into community gardens in your area. I've been a member of mine for years now. I even serve on the board of directors to it. So I know firsthand how empowering these types of organizations are at helping people who don't have the space or resources or even the know-how to grow, do so. For example, at my community garden, $60 will get you a 10 by 16 foot bed, which is the largest one that we offer for the entire year. So $60 the whole year. And that's going to include a ton of free perks like free soil and compost that you need, automated irrigation that we teach the gardeners how to set up, a bunch of different free community crop beds, free chicken eggs from our little community chicken coop, and so much more. You get so much for just a $60 bed rental. And the last thing that you can do to support this movement beyond personal choices is advocating for stronger local food systems in general. So support policies that promote sustainable agriculture, fair wages for farmers, and infrastructure that makes it easier for local food to reach consumers. This can include anything from voting for local food initiatives, supporting farm to school programs, or even just engaging in conversations about food sustainability and educating others about the benefits of this movement so that they can in turn spread word and we can drive collective action. So, is the farm to table movement just a foodie buzzword? Absolutely not. I see it as a really critical piece of building a more sustainable and resilient food system. And as climate change and geopolitical tensions and tariffs threaten global food security and affordability, frankly, farm to table is the best solution we have. By strengthening our local food networks, investing in regenerative farming, and just in general shifting consumer habits, we can reduce our reliance on carbon-heavy industrial agriculture. Farm to table is not just about taste or nutrition, though that is certainly a big benefit to it, but it's also about rethinking the way that we produce, distribute, and consume food in a way that works with our planet and not against it. Now, over to you. Let me know in the comments. Do you already support the farm to table movement? Or maybe what's your favorite way to eat locally? And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, as that really helps us reach more people and spread these important messages. Once again, this is Amber from SJ. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.